All right, so today I want to talk to you about a question that often comes to the table, and that question is there really a need? Does the trucking industry really need freight brokers? Does the freight broker provide value to the trucking industry? And most times, when you hear people talking that are really not well informed about the trucking industry, or maybe you've had some truck drivers that had some negative run-ins, negative experiences with freight brokers, they will answer that question and say, no, there's absolutely no need for the freight broker, and we could do without freight brokers, get them out of the way. But when you really start to think about it, to dismiss the value of the freight brokerage or the freight broker service is to misunderstand the shipper's operation. Because let's make sure that we understand something. Freight brokers don't hire themselves. They don't just make themselves a part of the transportation industry. What happens is shippers see value in that freight broker service, and they hire freight brokers. The freight broker takes over sometimes their logistics operation, and the only reason that happens, the only reason that the shipper would have any kind of dealings with a freight broker is if that shipper saw value in what that freight broker was offering. So I think that we have to really understand how the shipper operates first to understand the value that the freight broker brings to the equation. Let's talk about it. So before we go too far, I want to explain to you exactly what I mean when I say value. Because value, in my opinion, can be sometimes overused and it just turns into a buzzword. So when I say value, what I'm talking about is, let's say a shipper has a big problem. In order for you to provide value to that shipper, you have to provide a service that solves that big problem. And what is a big problem? A big problem is a problem that the shipper recognizes. He or she knows that they need assistance with it because they don't have the time, they don't have the resources, and or they don't have the desire to solve the problem on their own. So what they say is, you know what? I'm willing to go out and pay someone to take care of this for me. That's where the freight brokerage comes in at, with a service that solves the shipper's problem. And if he can solve that problem, he has value to that shipper. And the shipper is willing to pay him to do that job. Now, some of you say, he is not really paying the freight broker because he's just paying the freight broker what he would pay the carrier. That's where you would be wrong at least with me as a brokerage, and most brokerages that I know is not going to charge the same amount of money that a carrier would charge. And it's very simple. Why? Because the broker is doing more than moving a load from point A to point B. He's offering a logistics service, and that's what we're getting ready to talk about and outline the value of the freight brokerage service. So for the sake of this video, let's say a shipper is direct to carriers. He's moving his own loads, he's not using the assistance of a freight broker, and he's using manual systems as opposed to digital services. Now, let's just say he's moving approximately 500 loads per week. Not a lot of loads at all. So in order to get 500 loads a week moved, he's going to have to talk to a minimum of 1,000 carriers. So he's talked to 1,000 carriers, he has 500 loads now ready to move. Let's say of those 500 carriers, 200 of those carriers are new carriers. So he has to do setup packages, he has to vet those carriers, he has to check those carriers out and make sure that they pass all of the safety requirements. So now the shipper has 500 carriers locked in and ready to move his 500 loads. He now sends out 500 rate confirmations. Of those 500 rate confirmations, he'll have to resend 100 rate confirmations. 50 of the confirmations will have to be resent due to cancellations by carriers. So not only does he have to resend 50 of the rate confirmations, he has to get new carriers, go through the vetting process again for those 50 carriers. Another 50 rate confirmations have to be resent due to changes that will have to be made to those rate confirmations. Now it's showtime and it's time for loads to start moving. Now the shipper has to be Mr. Telephone Man. He has to call those carriers to make sure that they're going to be at the pickup location on time. Once those carriers get to the pickup location, they are going to be calling back and forth saying, I can't get a door. This happened, that happened. He's going to have to call those pickup locations, find out what the problem is, why he can't get carriers doors. It's going to be calls after calls after calls on top of the things that the shipper already has going on with his job. And oh, by the way, these calls are not just happening at 2 p.m., they're also happening at 2 a.m. And what shipper do you know wants to take on calls at 2 a.m. in the morning when he has to get up and be at work at 7 a.m.? And it doesn't stop there. When the driver gets to his drop-off location, it starts all over again. I can't get a door. They're not accepting the load. They're saying I don't have an appointment. The paperwork is not correct. On and on and on. And you might think the chaos is coming to an end once the carrier drops the load and reports clean bills. But you would be mistaken, because now the shipper has to collect all of those documents back, verify those documents, and then pay 500 different carriers. So not only does his accounting section have to pay the employees that work with the company, but he also has all of those carriers that are moving loads that have to be paid. And oh, by the way, they also have to be sent out 1099s at the end of the year. So it's a never-ending cycle. It's a whole lot that comes with a shipper that's moving his own loads without the assistance of a freight broker. Or he can use a freight broker and pay one freight broker instead of 500 different carriers. Which do you think he would choose? Which would be much easier for the shipper? You know, like I know, hiring a freight broker. The freight broker stands in the gap for the shipper. He takes on all of his problems all day and all night long. And all he wants in return is more and more loads, and to get paid and get paid on time. That's why shippers work with freight brokers. The freight broker provides immense value. Have a great day. Have a great rest of your week. Until the next time, I wish you the very best in your life and business. See you at the top, because the bottom is too crowded.